Okay, can you hear me? Is this going to be good? All right. Normally I like to kind of go and walk around and point at things while I'm doing stuff, but I made the mistake of wearing these awesome colored contacts today, and I'm going to do my best to read my own slides, but hopefully it goes okay. So welcome to Engineering Big Costumes. Today we're going to be talking a whole bunch about building costumes that are huge, larger than life, that takes up a whole bunch of space. So you too can be the really annoying person blocking the hallway of the convention. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Enayla. I'm here all the way from the United States, so a little jet lagged right now, but ready to go. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring some of these huge costumes with me in my suitcase. I was asked a few times, but I think I'm going to need a full-on moving van to do that. But I will be kind of teaching all of my secrets today, sort of going through my full process of how I go about building these costumes. Because these are some of my absolute favorite costumes to make. And like the charitable explanation for that would be, okay, they have a lot of unique engineering challenges. It's so satisfying when you finally finish them. Usually you're going to kind of draw a crowd at a con, and that feels good, and that's fun. But let's be real here. I'm a tiny little person, and the actual reason is because I'm compensating for something. But that's okay. So whatever your reasons for being here, costumes that are huge and oversized are so much fun to build, and we're going to go through the full process, basically start to finish, about how I would approach something like this. So just before I start, real quick, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions, but please feel free to interrupt me anytime if you have a question about something I'm talking about. I'll do my best to do the metric conversion in my head. I'm not quite that good at it. But I also might mention some like particular product brands or something like that that you don't have here, so please let me know if there's anything, and I'm sure somebody can name an alternative that you would actually be able to buy all the way on this side of the world. So let's get started. So first things first, I just wanted to show a couple of, these are my two biggest costumes that I built to date. And I show you these not to just show them off or anything, but because these are the two that I'll be using as examples throughout this panel, basically to show my full process. So the one on the left, the massive robot character, that is a golem from Guild Wars 2, the video game. And the little character, me, right next to it, they're these little, about 1.5 meters tall little gnome characters. And what they do is they summon these huge giant robots and they climb up into them, and that's how they fight. And so I had wanted to build one of those for a really long time, but obviously I'm not, 0.5 meter tall. And so I decided, okay, I got to build this huge thing and give myself scale, and that would be the way to show that, hey, I'm actually supposed to be a little thing. So this one, the robot, it actually stands a little over 3 meters tall, and it's currently sitting in my living room, which is it's my favorite decoration. Every Christmas I dress it up in lights and stuff, and that's kind of the only place in my house where it will fit, and I've been kind of enjoying it. So. And then the one on the right there, this is GLaDOS from Portal 2, the video game also. And she is this fantastic, quirky character. She's a robot, and she hangs from the ceiling and sort of antagonizes the player character as you go through the game. And she's a huge goal character of mine. I loved this character for a long time, but obviously, how are you going to, be this robot that's hanging from the ceiling? So I figured, okay, if I'm going to do this justice, I'm going to build a huge structure. This one's about 2 meters square, and hang myself upside down from it in a little harness thing. And I always get, I will talk about this later, but I get a lot of questions about this one. To be honest, it's like lying in a hammock. It's very comfortable. And I have taken a nap during a convention at some point. So. All right. So first things first, with any type of cosplay, the most important step is planning. And doubly so for some of these big costumes, because if you sort of mess something up, there's a lot more materials down the drain and stuff. So it's really important to kind of get a good idea of what you're doing before you even get started. And with both of those previous costumes I showed you, I was honestly sort of brainstorming and keeping notes in a notebook for about a year before I even started those costumes, just to kind of work out some of the kinks beforehand. So yeah, first things first, go ahead and grab your references. If you're not doing a cosplay or a costume from a reference, then skip this step, you're fine, you're good to go. But since a lot of our cosplays were trying to be quite accurate to characters, references are really important. So first thing, what I'll do is I'll go and grab as many screenshots as I can from the source material. So if it's a video game, I'll go in and I'll play and I'll rotate the characters around and take a bunch of screenshots, different lighting, different angles, things like that. If it's an anime, it's the same thing. If it's a comic, try and start taking snaps, or, you get the gist. For these really big costumes, though, if at all possible, I really like to try and find a 3D model of them. So for a lot of anime and comics and things like that, you're probably out of luck. But for video games in particular, a lot of times the 3D models will actually be available in various locations. So in some particular games, so for example, you can see the 3D model that on the second photo right there of GLaDOS. And I was very, very lucky with this costume because the company that makes Portal, they actually have a program within Steam that you can pull the models in, and they're all available. You can look up any type of character model, any sort of plant or bush or anything that you want to get. You can grab them in, and then you can sit there and slowly rotate these around and look at them and stuff. And so I have a kind of a little embarrassing story of that on Steam. Out of all of my games, so Skyrim and Dragon Age and The Witcher and games that I've put 800, 900 hours into, my most played game on Steam is actually the Portal 2 model viewer, just because I had it open, all day, all night for several months while I was working on this costume. But yeah, so those are really invaluable. A lot of times if there isn't sort of a dedicated model viewer, so I know there's a bunch for like World of Warcraft has one, League of Legends has one, stuff like that. If there isn't a dedicated one, a lot of times there will still be people that will actually sort of go into the game files and pull out models. So for example, yesterday I was wearing a Witcher cosplay, and I managed to find somebody on DeviantArt who actually just pulls models and kind of likes to make scenes from them or whatever. And I asked them, hey, could you possibly, is there any chance you could go in and grab me this character model for the costume I'm working on? And they did it. They gave it to me. And so then I had this perfect reference that I could rotate around and look at and zoom in at every angle. So that's a really, really valuable resource if it's available for the costume you're working on. And then lastly, really, really important is to try and see if you can find any real-world references for what you're working on. So with a lot of our big costumes, usually there's just these very strange things that we're trying to pull off, right? There's a lot of challenges, like how am I going to be this tall, or how am I going to hang from this thing, or how can I basically work out this engineering? And the really nice thing is, sometimes there's something that already exists in real life that sort of mirrors that and kind of has already solved that problem. So for me, right, I decided I wanted to do GLaDOS. I wanted to hang upside down from this structure, but my problem was, how was I going to build this structure? How was I going to have connection points along my body so that I wasn't cutting off my circulation, that I wasn't going to get really tired, it wasn't going to hurt, it would support my body, and I wouldn't be falling on my face halfway through this. And I thought, okay, well, there's a thing like hang gliding or paragliding, which you can see in that photo over there. And that's kind of a very, very similar situation, like my body's in a similar position, and they had already worked out, this is where your connection points should be. This is how you should, set up this harness or whatever. And so I was able to pull from that, and basically you can see this photo that will never see the light of day otherwise, except for this panel. This was sort of me prototyping and testing, don't do it, prototyping and testing how that was going to work out. And so it was fine. I have never fallen on my face in this costume before, and that worked out really well. A similar thing, and I'll mention it later, but if you're doing a lot of big mech characters or whatever that are on stilts, you can go and you can buy really expensive kind of unstable stilts meant for other things, but my favorite thing to go and buy are drywall stilts that people use when they're putting up walls on buildings and things, because they're really nice, they're very cheap. I don't know the conversion, I'm sorry, but I can find them for $40 or $50 on eBay is normally, no problem, so that'd be 30, 40 euros, I guess. And so those work out really well because they're super, super stable, and they're meant sort of for that purpose of just standing around without falling over and having any problems like that. Because if you fall over while you're putting drywall up, you are going to have a problem. Okay, so by far the most important thing for big costumes, obviously, is scaling. So deciding how large you're going to make this object and basically scaling it so that it will work out with human proportions. Because it's a lot harder to sort of visualize how big, the arm of this big robot should be in comparison to this big body when it's not a normal human size. So first thing, go back to your references and make sure that you're getting references that show scale. So what I mean by this, my example is my little Asura and Golem. I went into the game and I made sure to take screenshots of the small character that's going to be my height next to this big giant robot, right? So I can get an idea of, okay, this thing is about 3 times taller than I am, and sort of measure that out and scale it out how it should be. if you remember the previous photo I showed you, you can see that I am actually not to scale with this, because if it was truly to scale, I mean, we're talking like 5 or 6 meters tall. And there is not a building or a convention center in the world where that would actually work. Maybe in here at the very back, but even so, not so much. And so I chose to make it just a little bit smaller for practical reasons. It does need to physically fit in a room where I'm going to be showing it off. So. Or my living room. No, it's in my living room because I have a vaulted ceiling in that room. That is the single only room in my house where it actually fits. So, and it's shoved like right in the little corner tip. Yeah. Okay, so get your references, figure out your scale. Then what I'll actually normally do is go into Photoshop or a paint program and something like that, and I will start actually basically using rulers to start measuring between my body and these screenshots to kind of figure out approximately basically how long various pieces of this costume should be. So here's an example. This is literally my Photoshop file while I was working on this costume. So I grabbed that screenshot, I took some photos of myself, I scaled myself to the right thing, and I took some photos of myself physically holding a ruler, and I scaled that down, and then basically I was able to, sort of make copies of this ruler and essentially say, okay, this is what the scale should be. That's kind of annoying, and I'm really annoyed because I did this entire thing and then I discovered this fantastic program online that basically does the exact same thing. It's at a website called knifegun.com, very strange, and it's a cosplay scaling tool. Now, I've been doing this panel for a while and I've been giving this out, and apparently this website kind of likes to come and go, so I apologize in advance, but it's really by far the best tool that I've been able to find to sort of do the same thing. So you can see this is a screenshot right there from the program, and what you do is you pull a screenshot or a reference image in, you basically draw a line and you give it a set distance. So for example, on this what I would do is I would take my reference image with the tiny little Asura and the big golem, and I would measure the height of the Asura, and I would say, okay, that is 5'4", I'm sorry I don't know the conversion, that's my height. And it would basically scale everything else up to that. So you can draw lines everywhere else on this image, like you can draw a line down the arm of the robot and stuff like that, or up the leg, and it will tell you, okay, here we've done the math, it's basic algebra, this is what these various pieces should be scaled to. So that's super, super useful. If you can find it when it's working, definitely try and check out that website. But if not, pulling it into a Photoshop or Paint program is just as good. And then lastly, it's really important while you're scaling your stuff to make sure that you know sort of what the restrictions are of, practically where you're going to be showing this piece off. So I mentioned like it barely fits in my house, but my house is, it's not huge. A lot of convention centers have very high ceilings, but they also have restrictions on doorways, and they have restrictions on hallways, and there's restrictions about what you can physically fit in your car and things like that. So if you're planning on bringing it to a particular convention in a particular convention center, it's really important to make sure that, yeah, you're actually going to be able to bring this thing, and it's not going to be sort of lying there in two halves and you never can show it off. The really nice thing is, and I assume it's similar over here, but in the US especially, most convention centers have websites because, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to use those, and they will actually put online the full, basically, measurements of everything, doorways, elevators, hallways, all of the major rooms and stuff like that, and so you can actually find out, okay, yeah, I know exactly how big this thing will be able to fit well in advance. So yeah, if you're trying to bring it to a particular event, that's a really, really good option. And then if you build it and you decide, hey, I want to take it to some other place, again, you should make sure that it will still fit before you go through all the pain of hauling it out there. So, okay, so on to materials. Obviously, there are a whole slew of different materials you can use. It also totally depends on sort of what is available in this part of the world. I assume you guys have access to a lot of the same stuff I do. But I know also in the US, sometimes things like foam and stuff are a lot cheaper and easier to get. So use whatever kind of you have available. But the most important thing about materials, excuse me, the most important thing about materials is that they have to be lightweight and they have to be cheap. Because you're going to be carrying these big pieces. If you're trying to transport and move them anywhere, they have to be lightweight. You're not going to want to carry something really heavy. And they have to be cheap because you're going to be using huge amounts of them, much more than you would on, say, like a smaller armor set or a smaller, normal human-sized cosplay. So my personal absolute favorite thing to use for structural elements, so sort of the skeleton of whatever I'm building, and I do this on almost anything. I do this on my wings. I used it on both GLaDOS and my Golem. Basically anything that needs a lot of structure is PVC pipe. So this is like the basic pipe that you use, water piping that you use in your house. You can buy it at any hardware store. It's really easy to get, and it's very, very inexpensive. But it has some really, really good properties. So first things first, PVC comes with a huge number of connectors. So elbow connectors and 3-prong connectors and curves and basically anything that you could possibly want to connect at any angle, there is a PVC connector for it. Especially they have ones that screw on and off, so if you have to disconnect pieces throughout the day and stuff like that, it's really, really useful. The other fantastic thing about PVC pipe is that you can heat shape it. So obviously, please be careful, nobody sue me for saying this, but you can hold it over a stove or use a heat gun, like a hot air gun, and basically when it's hot, you can mold it and mess with it. Be careful, it is very, very hot, you will burn yourself. But once it cools, it holds its shape. And so that's really, really good for having kind of curved pieces that don't have any hard bends or anything. And that works really well. So for my Golem, it was basically, a very spherical situation that was all heat shaped. Again, when I do a lot of really big feathered wings, and so I'll build the skeleton of the wings, and it's just a single piece of PVC pipe, all curved. And so yeah, so that works out really well. It's very, very strong once it cools, but still lightweight and easy to move around, and a little bit flexible. So if somebody bashes into it, you're not going to have a problem. I assume PVC, that's something you have the same name. Okay, sounds good. And then so for putting over, I like to call it, it's a little morbid that I call it the skeleton and then the skin, but basically the coverings or whatever your armor piece is for your various things. I really like working with EVA foam. So this is just, your typical porous, lightweight foam. It comes in a whole lot of different thicknesses, so if you don't need anything to be super sturdy, you can get the thinner stuff. It's usually a bit cheaper. And mainly, the nice thing about it is it's easy to get in huge amounts of bulk. So personally, what I do, I actually buy, we have a hardware store that sells anti-fatigue floor mats. So they're basically meant to put down in your shop or your garage so that your feet, you have something nice and kind of soft and bouncy to stand on. And they come in, they're 2 meters by 1 meter wide, and they cost $4. So I can get these huge, huge pieces for very, very cheap. And that's great when you're building a huge, huge golem. So I think for my big robot character, I went through about 30 of these floor mats. And that adds up after a while, but honestly, if you think about how much that is, that's $40 or $50. It's not too bad at all for such a huge piece. If you can't find it at the hardware store like that, a lot of times it's used a lot in industry as well. So a lot of upholstery companies or people that make bedding and things like that will have a lot of just sort of off-cut, very large off-cut pieces of this. So I have gone and just contacted some of these companies that make couches or whatever, and I've said, hey, do you have any spare pieces? They don't have to be that big, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we have a lot. They're very tiny pieces or whatever, but you can have them. And then I go and I pick them up, and they're just miles long because they're using them in huge, huge bulk. So if you have anything like that around here, you can go research online. That's a really good option for getting super cheap stuff. I've had companies just give it to me for free because they're just going to throw it out. So yeah, a good chunk of my Golem also was just pieces that I got from offcuts. Another of my favorite materials is Sintra. So if I use EVA foam a lot for my very curved, sort of flexible pieces, and if I have a lot of flat, straighter pieces or pieces that need a little bit more structure, I'll go ahead and use Sintra. It's also known as PVC foam or extruded PVC. It might have a different name here, I'm not totally sure, but essentially what it is, it's sort of like cardboard made out of plastic. So it has sort of 2 layers of plastic and a little bit of sort of corrugation in between. Yeah?
It's called 4X in here.
4X? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so there you go. You can look that stuff up. And this is really, really good because it's super smooth. It takes paint really well. You don't really have to fill it. So for EVA foam, obviously, it's a bit porous, and so you're going to have to put some sort of filler on it. But Sintra, you don't have to do that. You can paint directly on the surface, so that's really nice. Where I live, a lot of times this is used for signs, so like any sort of company puts signs up if there's a sale going on. Especially we have a whole bunch whenever we have an election. There's always people have these Sintra signs in their front yard showing off, hey, I like this candidate or this candidate. So like when we had our last election, the election ended and like a day later I went around my entire neighborhood and I was knocking on doors and I was like, can I please have your sign? Can I recycle your sign for you? And I just got a huge stack of this stuff that I later recycled for other stuff. So I think that's probably the best thing that has come out of Trump's presidency so far. All right. And then finally I'm glad it's not an offensive joke here, perfect. Okay, and then so for connections, my favorite thing to use, because it plays really, really well with EVA foam, is just regular hot glue. So hot glue works great with EVA because it essentially melts the foam just a little bit and sort of gets a really, really nice, strong bond. So most of the time, yeah, I'll just hot glue all of my seams on the inside as long as obviously the seams aren't going to show. For seams that need to be a little bit cleaner and have nicer edges and tighter connections, I'll buy something called barge cement. Is that... You can get barge online. Okay, any type of contact cement, essentially. Barge in particular is actually made for use for leather. So a lot of like shoe shops and shoe repair shops will have that as well. But you can order it online too. So I live on the very, very west coast of the United States, and I didn't realize that we had a hardware store. There's this great hardware store in my tiny little town, and I had never been to it. And so I ordered a can of barge cement all the way from Toronto, so the absolute opposite end. And then a couple weeks later went into my hardware store, and I was like, it's on the shelf right there. So, but even so, it shouldn't be too crazy expensive to ship it, and you can buy it in really big paint cans that will basically last you every project you will ever need to do. So, okay. All right, so on to the structure. So when I start my structure, when I'm doing any sort of cosplay project, if it's a sewing project or an armor or something, as I assume most of you do, it's time to do mock-ups, essentially, right? Because you don't want to waste your beautiful, nice, expensive fabric on something that's not going to quite work out. Unfortunately, for these really big costumes, it's really hard to mock them up full scale right off the bat. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and build some tiny little prototypes. So first thing, I'll just go ahead and start sketching out sort of ideas about maybe how big I think things should be, or approximately, how the different pieces should fit together, just to sort of wrap my brain around this is how this 3D shape should break down. So this is a photo like directly out of my actual notebook when I was working on this costume, and you can sort of see I was starting to sketch out basically how the structure should work for this golem arm and stuff. And then, yeah, go ahead and make some small-scale mock-ups. So anything you have lying around works perfectly fine for this. I've used popsicle sticks, wire, tape, anything like that. And basically just sort of build a small-scale model. It doesn't even have to be perfectly to scale. Just have an idea about how this big structure is going to work, maybe how the arm of this big robot is going to connect to the body, how the legs are going to move, how I'm going to break the whole thing apart for transport, so which pieces should be separate and which pieces should be connected. And yeah, so it's really important to go ahead and do this right off the bat, just to make sure that you don't, kind of get started on this huge, huge project and then have a big problem with basic things like connections and stuff later. Okay. So for the base structure, it's really important to go ahead and build like the biggest or the main piece first, because this is going to set essentially the full scale for what you're building. I sort of made a little bit of a mistake on this when I was doing my golem, and you can see here this is me like testing out how big this robot was going to be in comparison. In that, for some reason I got it in my head that the big sort of body part of it was the vast majority of this costume, and so I set the scale based on that. And I didn't quite realize that the legs are actually significantly bigger than the body, and the arms are a lot bigger than the body. So this ended up being a little bit bigger than I had originally intended. So again, planning important, scaling important. Please learn from my mistakes. But even so, it worked out okay. So because I had built the base body, and then at that point, the arms and legs and stuff, everything should be scaled to this main piece. Okay, I mentioned before about PVC. This is an example. Probably wear gloves. Don't do what I did here. But you can hold it over the stove, heat gun, anything like that, and heat shape it. And so that works really, really well. And the nice thing about PVC especially is you can heat shape it over and over and over again. So when I was sort of building this, I built it a little smaller than I wanted, so I like sort of added another little chunk to it and started reshaped it several times before I sort of got the structure and the shape that I wanted for it. Okay, I've already talked about all this stuff. All right, so yeah, real quick, drywall stilts for structure. Again, if you have big giant robot and things like that, or anything that's just you need to be much taller than you actually are, I would really recommend drywall stilts for that. Okay, and then for the structure, the most important thing is to go ahead and label all of your pieces. So if you can see on this structure that I have here, every single piece disconnects and breaks apart because to fit it into my tiny car, and I have a photo later, to fit it into my tiny car, I basically need to break it down to nothing, and I need to stack every single piece of this skeleton in a very, very small, compact space. And unfortunately, most of these pieces are symmetrical. There's a lot of them that look similar lengths and stuff. And if I hadn't labeled things, I would be sitting there on the convention floor like trying to figure out what IKEA wants me to do because it would be a total nightmare. So it's a very, very simple, you can come up with however labeling system you want, how technical you want to be with it. I basically just have, everything is like A, B, C, D, E, 2A, 2B, 2C and stuff relating to which connector piece goes to which piece. So essentially at that point I'm just putting together, like Legos, and I know exactly where each piece should go. And I'm able to build this in the extremely short time of about 4 hours at the day of the convention. So if that sounds long, trust me, it would be significantly worse otherwise. One of the important things to think about when you're building the structure is to, right off the bat, figure out how am I going to break this down, right? So how am I going to make this a lot smaller, be able to compact it, be able to fit it into my car so I can actually bring it somewhere, or even be able to fit it into a shipping bin and bring it on an airplane. I made a mistake with this costume, and I didn't think about that as early as I should have, and therefore it's a lot harder to bring my giant robot Gollum character to cons. I brought it one time in a moving van because I happened to be moving across town, and I had it for an extra day, and that worked out really well. And I'm able to shove it in my car, but I cannot fit anybody else in my car. So I went to a convention once where I had the whole thing in the car. It was in the front seat, it was in the back seat, in the trunk, everywhere. I drove down, and my poor friend, who was also coming with me, had to take the bus because she physically could not fit in this car with me. But yeah, so things like that, it's really important to think about sort of what dimensions you need to be able to fit things when it's broken down. My GLaDOS costume works out actually quite a bit better for transport. I bring this one to conventions all the time. You can see this photo right there. That is actually what it looks like completely disassembled. So it gets down quite small. You can see all of the structure and stuff gets stacked up, and all the sort of foliage and things shoves in a box, and I can sort of Tetris things and fit them together, and actually fit my friend in my car when I go and bring that one. Yeah, so yeah, think about the one thing also I love about PVC, right, is that it splits, so it's really ideal for transport. But any sort of material that you're using, make sure that you can sort of break it down and split it up and fold it up and stuff. So my favorite thing, once I have things split, is when you connect things back up, you want to make sure that they're very, very sturdy when you have them at the convention, right? So you need to be able to disconnect things, but you also need to be able to connect them and make sure they're not going to fall apart while you're hanging upside down from this thing, like, a meter above the floor. So what I'll do is actually, for most of my connections, my PVC connections, if they're going to be a permanent connection, so I'm not going to split them for transport, what I'll do is I'll actually drill a hole through the connector piece, through the pipe, and back out the connector piece, and put just a screw and a nut and have that be a permanent bond. Because there's not a lot of glue that works on PVC, so it's good to have like a physical thing that's never going to come undone. And then for pieces that do need to disconnect, but are still going to have a lot of sort of pressure on them and stuff, I'll do almost the exact same thing. I'll, again, drill a hole right all the way through the connection piece, and I'll take a little cotter pin. They're basically just kind of little metal pins that you can stick in that hole, and it will hold it temporarily, so there's no way that this connector can come undone while you're hanging upside down. But at the end of the day, you just pull the pin out, split it, and then you're ready to go. And then for connecting things like the skin onto my PVC pipe structure, I use a whole lot of strapping, and Velcro is usually my favorite method. I think I have a picture in a second. So I'll just go and I'll glue a bunch of Velcro and stuff, and I'll make straps. And so I'll just make sure, so for example, like the big golem body, that the armor will sort of sit in the right place, but it likes to sort of pull down and fall down on the weight of its own self. So it has little straps on the inside that just curl around the pipe or whatever, and it will hold it up, and it can't shift, it can't move, no problems throughout the day. So, okay. So skinning, yeah, I really need to come up with slightly less morbid titles for these, but essentially for building the overstructure for what you're doing. So, all right, so probably like the most intimidating thing I think about building some of these really big things is patterning, because that's probably some of the most intimidating thing for building any sort of costume. But in particular, you're kind of like, okay, this thing is not shaped like a human. I don't know how to, fit these measurements and things like that. But to be honest, it's an almost identical process to patterning for your own regular human-shaped garments. So if any of you guys have done any sort of pattern draping, it's actually almost exactly the same thing. So when I say draping, I mean basically what I'll go ahead and I'll do is I'll build the structure, and I usually use just kind of butcher paper, or I buy newsprint paper. And I'll just start sort of laying paper out and start taping it together. And then once I sort of have a nice, structure over this, basically a clothing over this structure, start drawing all my seams, cut out my seams, and there you go, unwrap it, there's your pattern, you're completely ready to go. So it's not too crazy, especially since if you're not doing it, physically on yourself, it's a lot easier to kind of build on a mannequin, essentially, on this really big structure. So I'm constantly, patterning my own garments, and I'm standing in front of a mirror with duct tape and trying to work that out. So I'll use usually paper. I go to my local newspaper and they'll sell me rolls of newsprint that they have left over after they've sort of gone through their full newsreel. And there's usually a lot of paper left on it, but maybe not enough for it to be worth doing another round of that day's newspaper. So they'll sell them to me for a couple $, and I have those that just last me for ages and ages. It's worth trying to find a cheap source of that, because you're going to go through just huge amounts of paper trying to pattern these things out. So anything that's sort of fabric or sort of draped or something like that doesn't have a lot of structure, I'll use paper. Whenever I have something that does have more structure, I'll go out and get foam core or cardboard. I don't know if it's called the same thing here, but essentially people use it for posters and things like that in school. And that works out really well for doing sort of mock-ups of stiff things, because it's really cheap. So here, this is my mock-up of the feet area, and you can see that's basically what I used. And just taped it together, nothing too fancy. I do want to take a second really quick and talk about how important it is to do reality checks as you're going through. You should be reality checking sort of throughout this entire process, but in particular for patterning, it's a big deal. So what I mean by reality checks is just make sure that your skin is fitting on the structure, that your structure is fitting in your car, that things are the right scale, that the arms are the right size for the body, things like that. Because it's really easy to sort of get lost in the details of this big project and forget that, this does need to actually connect. Yes, I need to actually be able to bring it. Yes, the skin does physically need to fit over this piece. So I'm teaching you all of my mistakes so you don't do the same thing. I screwed up pretty badly on this costume when I was working on it. What I had done is I had patterned the front part of this robot, and I had made the skeleton at home, and then I went all the way across the country back to university, and I decided I really need to get some more work done on this costume, but I obviously can't bring this whole thing with me. But I'm going to still try and work out patterning, because I have the numbers in my head and I have the measurements and things, and I can make it work without physically trying it on this skeleton thing. And so you can see the front of this robot and the back, they're actually perfectly symmetrical, and they should be perfectly symmetrical patterns, but for some reason that didn't quite occur to me. So I patterned out the back side and I patterned out the front side, and I brought them back, university session ended, I brought them back home for winter break or whatever, and tried them on my thing, and it didn't fit at all. It was not working out with this structure. So the front worked out fine, and the back, because it should have been the same, and I didn't think about it, but I had patterned it differently, it didn't fit. And so I basically wasted a lot of foam on this. I had to throw out a big piece that I had already cut up and taped together and messed with, because I didn't kind of do some logic checks throughout that process. So it's really important. Make sure that you're patterning physically on the structure. Make sure that you're trying it on as much as you would when you're making a regular, sewn garment or anything like that. Okay. So now actual skinning. As I said, I really like to use EVA foam for this, but any type, whatever will work for your project. It's totally up to you. Cardboard is fine. Foam is fine. Worbla is fine. If you feel like dumping hundreds and hundreds of dollars into this, it's fine. No judgment. But yeah, I really like EVA foam. I use it a lot. You basically need to seal it. So what I'll do is I'll heat seal it. Basically, you can heat it up very gently with a heat gun or a hair dryer, and it'll help the pores sort of close up a little bit and get a smoother surface so it doesn't start drinking up your expensive spray plastic. And then I'll spray it with Plastidip. I'm not sure, does that have a different name here? It's essentially a spray rubber sort of thing. Okay. Different brands. Okay. Yeah, so a spray rubber that I really like to use. You can also get like spray latex rubber and stuff. Sorry. Puberty decided to hit while I was on stage today. And so you can get anything like that that will sort of seal this structure but still remain fairly flexible. In particular with this costume, because I split it apart so much, all the pieces sort of lay flat, so it had to be sort of a flexible thing. If I use something like, I know a lot of people use wood glue and things like that for more structured armor, and that would just start cracking like crazy, like you'd have a really hard time with that. So yeah, something that just, some sort of flexible covering that will work fine. And then for all the little details and stuff, so you can see all of my beautiful like neon bright craft foam details, I get craft foam. So basically like the 2mm foam, and I just use super glue because I don't feel like waiting for contact cement to cure and harden and stuff with these tiny little pieces. So that works out fine. I get that at my local like craft store, but you can get it online. I'm sure it's not too hard to get, hopefully not here. And then for connections, I think I mentioned, you can see in this photo on the bottom, basically I'll use a lot of Velcro. I really, really like Velcro and strapping, so I will just hot glue Velcro, and then all of these pieces that all disconnect, you can see the sort of the divisions between them, they're all actually just connected with Velcro. So that's really nice. You can split it apart really easily, but then put it right back together. For this, I go ahead and I buy industrial Velcro that's used for like, sporting goods and backpacks and things like that because it's really, really strong. So you have to just fight it quite hard to get this thing disconnected, which is kind of annoying when you're, sort of putting it together, but it's really nice because you're not going to have this thing falling apart. Usual Velcro that you use for like sewing and shirts and things like that probably won't hold quite as well for some of these really big things. But yeah, your mileage may vary. So, and then for pieces where I need to like have a really, really strong connection, I'll go and actually sew buckles onto pieces of strapping, and then I'll hot glue the strapping to whatever piece I'm using, just like little backpack clips and stuff. And so those are really nice because you can disconnect them real quick. They're never going to come undone otherwise, but they're just kind of a quick connection piece. One thing I want to mention, so for adding these details, so for, again, all of my like rainbow colored details, it's really important to add your details onto your big pieces while it's in its final shape, essentially. So I know it's very tempting to kind of sit down these individual pieces on a flat surface and just get really up close and put all these details. But the problem is once you connect them all together, if you have to curve it or if you have to bend it or shape it, your details are going to start pulling off. They're going to get a little bit off because you're putting them on a curved surface. So I had this whole thing on this structure. It was sitting there in my craft room, and I was just kind of up close with it fully constructed, putting my details on. So a little bit annoying, but the end result was kind of a nice seamless thing. So. And then again, more labeling. So you can see, it's a little hard to see, but you can see these little, I just have masking tape on my foam, and I've just written sort of, this is the center front lower edge or whatever, and I have this whole system of figuring out this is where this piece goes and this piece goes and this piece goes, and so there's no, you don't have to think about it while you're constructing this thing in the beginning of the con day, and it goes together really quickly. So, okay, yeah, no, really, this is very morbid titles, I'm sorry to say. So Aftermath, oh man. So yeah, just a couple things I want to mention in consideration for some of these big projects because they have some unique things to think about. So I mentioned transportation, so important to think about this first. Otherwise, you're going to build it, it's going to be beautiful in your living room, and you're never going to be able to take it anywhere. So this is actually sort of an in-progress check of when I was trying to figure out if this thing would fit in my car. You can see it's very, very tight, but it does actually fit. That entire big giant robot fits in my tiny little, I have a Honda Fit, and I did manage to get it in there. But yeah, so it's just a good thing. You're probably not going to want to go and rent a moving van. You're not going to want to rent a trailer to bring something to a convention. So whatever you have access to a vehicle, maybe if you have a friend with like a larger SUV vehicle, that might be nice to bribe them a little bit. But in general, think about you're going to have to bring this somewhere. So figure out how to fit it in there. It's also important to think about how long it takes you to pack, unpack, and assemble the item, right? So my golem, it's about 4 hours of assembly. I can get it down quite a bit if I have some friends that are willing to help me out the morning of, which luckily I do have some friends that would humor me in that regard. But in general, if I was doing this completely by myself, right, that's 4 hours of con day that are down the drain, and I'd have to get up really early and I have to bring it to the con center, and that's something to think about. So if you have a panel that you really want to get to early in the morning, like think about that kind of stuff, and make sure that when you're constructing this that you know what you're getting into, right? Because it's no fun if you spend the entire day building it and you get to show it off for an hour and then you're done. So yeah, that's important. Also, packing and unpacking and stuff like that. I know right when we're leaving for a convention, it's always super hectic, and we're trying to get every little piece and trying to fit things in. And if it takes you, all day to pack this one thing, that's an entire day of like not finishing your costume that you're desperately hot gluing together. So that's an important thing to think about too. Okay, and then for storage. So I get asked this all the time, like, where do you fit these huge, massive things? So again, my robot, I'm cheating a little bit. It's in my living room. I like it. It's a cool decoration. We're the really weird house on the street that like has the giant robot in the window. And to be honest, I actually didn't realize that you could see it so well from the street until I had just moved in. I put my, big robot up. And I was going walking in my neighborhood, and I met, I was meeting the neighbors, right? And I said hi to some people, and we were chatting for a little. And they were like, oh yeah, I live up the street. And I was like, oh yeah, I live down the street. I'm in the White House or whatever. And they were like, wait a minute, like, are you the like what? Anyway, so yeah, no, that is my thing. I'm the person with the giant robot. But otherwise, for all of my other big costumes, I have a few methods that I do and store them. And they ended up, they will take up space. Like, that's the thing. They will take up a lot of space. But if you saw, how much I can break down things, like this is my full golem, basically almost completely broken down. The skeleton can break down even further than that, but you can see all the skin just basically stacks. You can get it down pretty small, and even if you don't have a lot of space, you can still, this is still for you. So yeah, so what I'll do is when I'm thinking about breaking stuff down, I'll make sure that I can break them down so that they can nest or that they can stack or basically use as little space and fit as much stuff in as little space as possible. So for this, all of the skin pieces, they all completely break down into small, approximately similar sized pieces, and they all stack. And so I can just kind of put those flat in a box. All of the structure pieces, so the big body piece that you can see over there, it actually splits into quarters, and because it's all symmetrical, they all sort of nest one inside the other, and it doesn't end up actually taking that much space. Okay, and then at home, what I'll do is, for a lot of my things, especially for my wings, because these are very, very good sizes for wings, is I'll put a lot of stuff in bicycle boxes. Refrigerator boxes if you have a little bit more space or it's like a less flat thing, but bike boxes are my favorite because they're really, really big. They're 2 meters long or something, and somewhat narrow, so you can sort of stack a whole bunch of them up to the ceiling, and they don't take up too much of a footprint in your garage or your shed or wherever you're putting this. And I go actually, so I have a couple bicycle repair shops or places that sell bikes, and I'll just go and say, hey, do you have any bike boxes maybe a little bit damaged or old that somebody brought in or whatever? And I've gotten a whole slew of these just for free. They just gave them to me. So if you can hear my sort of trend here, it's basically go bug industry and figure out whatever they're not using, and they'll probably give it to you if you're annoying enough. So. I also go and buy bins from IKEA and stuff like that, and I just buy the big plastic bins. So for any pieces that aren't flat or don't stack very well, I'll shove them into bins, and then those, I have them stacked floor to ceiling, 2 rows deep in my garage, and that fits pretty much all of the other pieces that I can't quite fit into bike boxes. One thing to be careful of course, is that if you're storing something, it's very tempting because you have this big piece, you're not going to go into it very often. It's tempting to go and kind of shove it in like a metal shed in your backyard, or somewhere that might have a hard time with heat or humidity, especially in the summer. I hear you guys have had a really, really hot summer this time around. Although it's not quite as hot as a lot of other places, you will eventually, if you have something especially in a metal shed in the sun, right, you're going to have a hard time. Your EVA foam is going to start melting and stuff. So it's really important to make sure you have a space where you're going to maintain your beautiful costume that you spent a lot of time and effort working on. So as I said, yeah, I have everything shoved in my garage because my car does not deserve that. It's devoted to costumes, but wherever you can fit things, it works out fine. Okay, and then lastly, I do want to mention, because our lovely convention organizers are here, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, convention etiquette. So with a lot of these costumes, they take up a lot of space, obviously, right? They're going to be filling a hallway. A lot of times they're very visible and they're very popular, and you're going to get a crowd of people all wanting to take your photo and stand next to this big, huge robot and kind of marvel at this thing. Which is really lovely. It feels great. It's a lot of fun, but it also is super disruptive sometimes to conventions. So it's really, really important just kind of be aware of your surroundings and, make sure that you're not going to be disrupting that hallway. Make sure that you haven't set this robot up right in front of a line that's trying to get into a panel and things like that. Otherwise, the convention might get a little annoyed with you, and it's really hard to move this thing that you've fully assembled if they want to kick you out. So I would really recommend be careful about that kind of thing. I've actually had really good luck with contacting some of the convention organizers beforehand if I know that I'm building something for a particular con. So both of those two, my GLaDOS and my Golem, I both built and brought those to our gaming convention, PAX, in Seattle. And so this is a huge, huge gaming convention. It's tons and tons of people, huge crowds. But they're also really excited about games, and they're really excited about these particular games. And so what I did is I actually contacted some of the organizers beforehand. They had like their email on the website, and I said, hey, look, I'm working on this costume. I'm not affiliated with a company or anything, but I'm working on this costume. I'm really excited about it, and I'd like to bring it to the con. Is there a place that I could set this thing up where I won't be disruptive, but I can still, have people enjoy it and be in the thoroughfare and stuff? And they've been really, really good. I've actually had people write me back and stuff and say, yeah, no, actually, I have an idea. It's the third floor around this corner. There's still a lot of people walking by, but there's a good space if you need to, if there's a crowd or anything. There's no lines going on for panels around there. That would be a great spot, and you have my official okay to put it there for the duration of the convention. So that's super, super nice because you know that once you get to a con, you're not going to be disruptive. You're not going to be a problem. You know that you have permission. So if anybody at the con is like, yeah, could you move? You're like, I have this email address and they told me it was fine. So that works out really good. It's a lot less hassle and stuff like that. And in general, like cons usually, as long as you're being cognizant about this thing, they're usually really open and okay with it because it's like, yeah, you're a huge draw. People are going to get excited. It's more programming to add to their event. And so usually people are quite good about it. I think obviously it goes without saying, if the con says no, save it for something else because you really don't want to deal with that kind of thing. So, okay. So that's all I have in general for programming, but I would love to take any questions if you guys have, especially if you're working on particular projects. I'm happy to talk about that. I teach panels on armor and sewing and corsets and anything, so if we have a little bit more time, I'm going to keep you here and make you ask me questions. So please. Yeah.
How much did that whole costume weigh?
Which one? Here, I'll go back to the beginning. So I really can't do the pound conversion. Please don't make me. But it's not that bad, to be honest. Here, let's go back to, okay. It's really, really not that bad. So I'd say I'm a pretty tiny, weak person. I'm not, not a weightlifter. When I'm carrying this between, areas of a convention, I split the two arms off, I split the body off and the two legs, and I can easily carry any of those pieces by myself. So yeah, no, not very heavy at all, because PVC is very, very lightweight, and then EVA foam is like air. It weighs almost nothing, so. Yeah.
So basically, you have to move it, you just like need to grab a few friends and
Yeah.
just be really
nice to them for a bit.
Exactly. Yeah, no.
Could you just hold a hand for me?
Just you grab a leg, I'll grab a foot. Yeah. Actually, I've gotten like random people in conventions. I'm like, hey, I want to move this like one hallway down. Would you mind helping? And people are like, yeah, I'll carry your giant robot foot for you. It's fine.
Also, I'm interested in how do you get into those costumes? Like how do you climb on?
Yeah. So for my Golem, my giant robot, I had originally intended to climb up into it and be able to walk in it, and it got a little bit bigger than I intended, so that doesn't happen, but I actually can climb up into it and sort of take photos with my face in the little, bubble area. And for that, actually, there's just a little opening in the back, and I sort of pull it open, and I can climb up into it and actually stand on the structural pieces inside. For GLaDOS, this one's actually, it's kind of a weird engineering thing. I basically can stand there. What it is it's a harness on the side, so all the armor is attached to a harness that I built that has these little loops all down the side of it. And I have little carabiners, they're like rock climbing clips that I use, and just have a friend like kind of hook me up onto these things, and then just sort of pick my feet up, and my feet go in, there's a little like stirrup thing, it's a little hard to see, but there's like a little stirrup thing for my feet and my knees, and they basically just lift my knees up and then I'm good to go. Yeah, so I can almost get in and out of it by myself. I need someone to lift my feet, but otherwise I can completely get in and out of that by myself. When I first made that, I got a lot of kind of awkward questions about people are like, is this a weird bondage thing or whatever? And I was like, no, it's not. I am 100% able to, move around. My arms are free and all that stuff, so yeah. Yeah.
So is that PVC pipe so started that it can support body weight, or do you have anything additional?
No, I don't. It's very, very sturdy. So if you saw for the pictures of my robot, because all it's really supporting, at least the body is only supporting the foam on top of it. So that's very, very thin, lightweight PVC pipe. For GLaDOS, you can see there are these much, much bigger, sturdier pipes. And you can get pipes in a lot of different sort of wall thicknesses, essentially. So some of them are going to be more flexible, and others are more sturdy. This one is about, sorry, I can't do this conversion, but I think this was the 2-inch pipe, so, about this big. And that was completely fine for my own body weight. I'm a pretty tiny person. I weigh about 105 pounds, so obviously your mileage may vary, but you can get pipe that's up to, you can get huge pipe. And it's meant to be very, very sturdy. It's meant to support the weight of huge amounts of water, basically, going through your house. So, yeah. Basically, whatever you want your project to be, you can find pipe that will work for it. Yeah.
How long can you comfortably stay inside the GLaDOS costume?
A really long time. Yeah, it's like lying in a hammock, honestly. So the only hard part is sort of holding my head up for photos, but if I can let my head droop, I have legitimately taken a nap in that before. The armor bits of it or whatever are all attached to the harness that I'm wearing, so I can sort of walk around the convention just with the robot character. And so I always joke, because cons are tiring, sometimes you don't get a chance to sit a lot, your feet get tired, go up, take a nap in GLaDOS. Yeah, a little bit, not a whole bunch. I've done a bit with wings, so my much smaller pieces I've done a little bit, and those are just like with Adafruit programming and stuff like that. Not a whole lot. I'm surprised nobody has asked me what my next project, my big project, because I always get asked that. But I have a plan for doing one of the big robot creatures from Horizon Zero Dawn, and I really, really would like to be able to make the head move and sort of tilt and have lights and things. So that's something I'm going to work on. But I have a little bit with wings. It's really nice because you can sort of buy these robotic kits that are very, very simple. They're completely, basically like put together. You just have to hook them up. They work out pretty well. But that's not my super area of expertise. I'm about to sort of learn a whole bunch more for it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm between a few. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I was thinking of doing a watcher because that's like the basic one. I'm sorry, it's been a very long week and I'm a bit jet lagged. I'm blanking on in the newest expansion. There's these sort of saber-toothed tiger creatures. I can't remember what they're called, but I think that's the winner right now. We'll just say it. I have a few more projects I have to finish before then, but yes.
A lot of the robotic costumes have been like armors or robots. But have you made, or could you see yourself making something more animal-like, like a flesh creature, so to speak?
I mean, maybe. That's not totally my area of expertise, like doing really like organic sort of shapes and things like that. I haven't had a particular need. For some reason, I really like robot. I don't know. I like the aesthetic of them. I sort of like the technical look. I'm a programmer in real life, and so it's just sort of a in real life. I don't know what that means. In my regular day job, and so there's something kind of nerdy and fun about that. But no, I haven't yet. Maybe someday. Did you have a particular project you were trying to work on, or?
Yeah, in the Forgotten Realms lore, there's this four-armed, huge, half-human, half-drow creature. I'm making a former friend.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I have gotten some ideas. Thank you. Thank you for doing this from us.
Okay, yeah, well, you're very welcome, and good luck with that. I think, honestly, with organic shapes and things like that, I know a lot of people for, like, sort of skin textures, they do a lot of, like, latex and stuff like that. Honestly, I think that's probably going to get expensive and heavy and stuff for what you're working on, and I've seen people do really nice organic-looking textures just dremeling down EVA foam, to be honest. So depending on what kind of scales or whatever this creature is going to look like, I think a lot of the stuff would still carry over. Yeah. Yeah, hopefully. Well, that's awesome. I'd love to see pictures if you finish it. Please let me know. Yes.
What kind of paint job do you recommend?
Okay, yeah. So for all of my costumes, absolutely regardless of whether it's huge or oversized or anything, I use regular acrylic paint. Because it plays really well with a lot of the primers that I use. It works really well with that spray rubber Plastidip, so you're not going to have a hard time with it coming off or anything. And regular acrylic, someday I'd love to get an airbrush. I think that's next on my wish list, but they're pretty expensive. So I hand paint everything. So this entire Gollum and GLaDOS 100% hand painted with a brush. And that took a long time, but yeah. Oh, and then I think I'll mention really quick, for acrylic paint, it can get expensive, so you can I buy it in big bulk and stuff like that. For sealing it, when I'll do like my static armor, I'll seal it with like a really nice spray gloss like varnish and stuff. But since that's not very flexible, what I actually really like to use, and what I used on my big robot, is you can buy Plastidip, that spray rubber, in a clear variety. So you can actually seal the entire thing with basically a layer of clear spray rubber, and that you can smash this on the ground, you can rub all over it, it's not going to have any problems coming up, so, yeah. No, not at all. It dries like very, it's not sticky at all, like very matte, yeah. Spray rubber, it sounds a little bit weird, but it actually dries like, not sticky. What is the word for like not sticky? I don't, you know what I mean, yeah. Yes? I would still do a lot of the same things, right? So if you have costumes that you're wearing that have these, if they have big, large, oversized limbs or anything like that, like PVC pipe structure, EVA foam skin, anything like that, you have sort of an extra level at that point of figuring out how to strap it to your physical body. And at that point, it's actually really similar to how you would strap regular, smaller sized armor to yourself. So what I do, again, I use a lot of strapping, like backpack strapping, and I use a lot of Velcro and a lot of backpack clips, kind of the same exact thing. I think if you're going to be wearing it, it's really important to spend some time making sure that you have sort of a quick release system for that, just in case you need to run to the bathroom or there's something that comes up. But yeah, I'd say a lot of my tips are probably quite similar to how I would attach things to a skeleton instead of you're attaching it to your body. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's not too mobile, so I can climb up into it. without everything on it, I physically can take some steps, so I can walk in it, but it's just unstable is the main problem with it, and I do not want to fall on my face in that one. But actually, I can move the arms as well. They're on almost like a boat, like rowing system in there. So like there's a joint and then there's a piece through it, and essentially it just hangs free. So I can actually move the arms, and while I'm in it, I can move the arms up and down and stuff. But yeah, not really what I would call like wearing it in per se. Yes. There is. I'm sure there is. There's a Facebook group called, I think it's probably mostly based in the US, but there might be something similar out here. I don't know how crazy you guys are. I'm blanking on the name. It's something about like building oversized costumes or something like that. And yeah, there's a big group of people. They all go. Usually I don't like meeting other people at cons because I'm like, this is my space. I'm gonna be the person in the, no. But yeah, no, people have organized stuff, especially if they're doing, I remember like when the Transformers craze was a big thing, there were like 15 of them and they were all just took over like a hallway in the entire convention center and organized that. But that said, like even if so the Facebook group is really good. I'm so sorry, I cannot remember the exact name, but you should be able to find it pretty easily. It's really good even if, a lot of those people are in the US or Canada and you're not going to be at the same convention together, but there's a lot of sort of tips and tools that people have given and advice if you're just like, hey, I'm working on this thing or whatever, I'm not quite sure what to do. And then I guess on that I should say, like, excuse the minor self-advertising, my name is Enayla, Enayla, Cosplay on every social media that exists, and if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to message me. Give me a reference picture, I will help out if I can, so. Yes? Okay, yeah, that's a really good question, thank you. So what I do for the skeleton pieces and stuff, in general, because PVC pipe and foam both are like so cheap, I just kind of have a huge collection of them lying around in general, so I don't have to be too accurate about that because I just kind of have a string of these costumes I make. For PVC in particular, so for the skeleton, what I would do is I would take my little scale mock-up that I made out of wire or whatever, and just trying to make it as close to scale as possible. So say, hey, this 1 inch is 1 foot or whatever, 1 centimeter is 1 meter, and you should be able to get actually quite accurate with that because you've sort of figured out exactly which pieces fit where. And then yeah, for the skin, assuming that you're going to be patterning it out, like doing a mock-up in paper or something like that, there you have your full pattern. You already know exactly how much you're going to need for it. As with anything, I think this is a very general cosplay tip, buy more than you think you're going to need because it's always a pain, especially if you're ordering it to get more. And these materials are so generic, like you're going to use them over and over and over. Like I use PVC for my big costumes, for my structure, I use them for my wings, I use them for building staves, I use them for building axes, I use them for building basically almost anything that has some sort of long straight thing going on in it, yeah. Sorry.
I've had some experience with trying to use EVA to make like armor and stuff like that, and it's sort of how do you start like visualizing yeah, there's smaller models, but how do you start visualizing how do you form them together?
Okay, yeah, so what I'll do, usually that's sort of in the paper patterning side of things. So like when I have all my seams and stuff, I know, okay, this is where they're gonna connect up. I probably am gonna need, like I'll just put some tape or whatever and mark, okay, wherever I have tape or wherever I have clips or whatever, that's where I need to have a connector. And then, yeah, I'm not sure, sorry, what was the rest of your question?
It was more of just sort of like how do you sort of get an understanding of how these sort of pieces of EVA form that together?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Like, I think mostly in the patterning, honestly, at a certain point, it's sort of experience. And it's sort of, you just worked it out and you've sort of laid them down a few times and started cutting the pieces to scale and stuff. Especially, that's probably why I spend so much time like in the planning stage, and especially if I can get the 3D model, a lot of time in the 3D modeling stage. I sit there and I just rotate my stuff over and over and over, and I get a good idea because A lot of, video games and comics and stuff are actually quite good about putting seams in realistic places and kind of having pieces that move and stuff like that. Obviously, if you can watch like whatever the piece is in motion or whatever, so assuming it's not like a static comic book thing, watch in motion. So right, these characters, like the golem has big arms and they move, and the legs and they move, and so I can think, okay, that's where these pieces should disconnect. This is how they need to connect up together, stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, there's a reason I always recommend like these really cheap materials, because if you mess up or if you go through a few and you need to use the actual materials to prototype, it's okay, and you haven't lost, a lot of money, and you haven't lost a lot of time, so yeah. I feel like I didn't quite answer your question, I'm sorry. Basically, the answer is just be good at it, just try it for long enough. No, just fail many times, yeah. I am also available for anything. I will talk to you about armor. I will talk to you about corsets. I will talk to you about bustles and hoop skirts. That's the other panel I give. If you have any questions. Yeah.
I have been following you since you made the color from Dragon Age. It was absolutely fantastic.
Thanks. That's my favorite costume.
The question I have is, how do you go planning, since color is very, manly and
It's a gender bend, in case anyone's wondering. So that's yeah.
how do you plan a gender bend like that? Because the finished end result was very changing and
Thanks. That's a really good question, because it's sort of involved in the scale and stuff like that. So I did a character from Dragon Age. It's a big burly man that I definitely did not fall in love with while romancing. And I was like, okay, I would love to make this costume right, but I'm never gonna have that build. It's not quite right for me. So I did a gender bend of it. For that one, I mean, I started out with basically, kind of picking out which elements of the character really sort of represent him. So he's this particular character, he's known as like the Lion of Ferelden. So he has this big sort of lion mane cape thing going on. I was like, okay, I need to have that. That's important, and it needs to be big and impressive and stuff. And he has various elements of armor pieces and stuff. And so I was just kind of like, okay, what are sort of the essences of this character and sort of represent him? And if you saw it, halfway across the room, would you still be able to recognize that sort of thing? But also he has some pieces, like he has these big pauldrons and some really big armor pieces that just wouldn't look good on someone with a tiny little frame. So for those, I mean, I just kind of scaled them down, honestly. I redid the breastplate, and so it's a little bit more sort of feminine looking. I've put a corset in it because I really like making corsets and stuff like that. But for that, it was a lot of just sort of trial and error in deciding. For the pieces that I sort of designed myself, I spent a lot of time looking at like high fashion runways and things like that, and picking out sort of, ooh, I like this element, I like this way the skirt drapes or whatever, or for the, Sorry, I don't mean to get specific talking about a costume you can't see, but for that particular costume, he has this sort of draped shawl thing, and I built a corset, and I didn't want to completely cover it up, so I was looking at like Halloween costumes, and I found this great like Halloween costume like sold at some cheap store that had sort of this cape like attached to the arm, and I was like, oh, that's a really good way to kind of bring it off my body and still have this thing. I think it was like Cleopatra or something. And so yeah, kind of inspiration from all sorts of stuff. But it is, there are still elements of that costume that are really big and oversized because he's like a warrior covered in armor, and I wanted to maintain some of that, so yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I was interested you said you made like big wings.
Uh-huh.
You told you use PVC pipe.
I do. I want to know, do I have internet here, Yanni? Okay, let me see if I can grab a browser really fast. Because I have that doesn't work. I actually have a wing tutorial online on my Tumblr and on DeviantArt and stuff, which I can show you in just a second. Oh man, I'm gonna have to, oh geez, this is gonna be hard. Okay. Wait, where's the, this keyboard is so weird, where's the, I need a slash.
Slash?
Okay, wait, hang on, go back, I think. I need enayla.tumblr.com/wings. Have we got it yet? I can't see it on the screen, I'm sorry.
No. That is actually hard.
It's really hard, right? Here.
Yeah, let's do this.
Sulla jäi sinne viiva sinne.
Hey.
Oh, there we go. All right, that's much easier.
Ota se viiva pois sieltä.
Sitä ei näe tuonne.
Thank you.
Tech support.
I was not expecting to come across the world and the computer keyboards to be like the weird thing that threw me off. Before you go, oh, come on. Sorry, Tumblr's trying to make us like approve. What? We are of age. We get it. It's fine. Okay. Cool. So I have a way. It's at enayla.tumblr.com/wings. Hopefully that's not too long. And so this is my wing tutorial. So what you can see here, I can go through the same thing. References. Here's PVC pipe structure. Basically the exact same thing. So my main thing that I do, if I can build a lot of my wings, I try and build them into corsets. So the way I do it is I actually build, you can sort of see in these pictures, I build some channels that go into the back of my corsets. And then I'll just build a structure out of PVC. Oops. So this sort of curved structure, and that has these PVC sort of skeletal pieces that go vertically, and they just stick right down into the tubes in the back of the corset. Put a little connector piece so they can't swivel back and forth. And that way I have these pair of wings that actually, like, if I need to use the restroom, a friend can literally just grab the whole pair of wings out of the back of my corset, set it down on the floor, I run to the bathroom, come back, put them back in. But yeah, in general, honestly, it's almost the exact same process. So you can see here, this is me like heat shaping wings over the stove. And so I do them, yeah, all PVC for the skeleton with a few connector pieces. And then I'll go ahead and, do I have another thing? Wait. Yeah, and then I'll cover them in chicken wire, or especially recently they've been releasing like plastic chicken wire at the hardware store, so it's a lot more lightweight, but it still has that nice sort of structure. And I'll use that for wings that have a bit of like a concave sort of curved element to that. So put that down, then I put batting, so what they use in quilts and blankets and things, on top. Spray painted if it's like a weird color, because usually it comes in just white. And then actually hot glue all of my feathers individually onto those. So I'll go and trim all my feathers and then just use hot glue, and it stays really, really well. Yeah, so. No, they're real feathers. I buy them from a shop in California, so I don't think this is too helpful for you. If it matters, it's called Rainbow Feather Company. But yeah, so you can get, basically they're offcuts. So from actually the meat industry. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm like, I don't partake in that, but I will take all of your goose feathers and chicken feathers. So yeah, those are all real feathers. I have also made feathers out of EVA if it's like the really, there's some like Ion has some really big feathers. And so you can make them out of basically any material, but I really like real feathers for wings if I can, because they look really nice. Let's see. Okay, we have 3 minutes. Please give me one more. Yes? That's rough. So yeah, I've been cosplaying for about 12 years. At least 40 or so. Yeah, quite a lot. More recently, because especially when I'm building some of these big ones that take, 6 months to a year to make, been slowing down quite a bit, but I have a lot. Out of like big oversized ones, I have 7 pairs of wings that are, fairly large, because that was sort of my niche thing that I started out doing. And then these 2 are my biggest ones. I have another big robot that I also made. And then yeah, hoping to add to the arsenal eventually with a Horizon costume. So. Okay. I think I've bullied you guys into asking questions. Oh, we have one more. Yes, good.
This may be a horrible question, but do you have any experience about a cosplay that went horribly wrong? And why did that happen, and what advice would you have for people who are going to make the same mistake?
I have several horror stories. I actually give a panel on cosplay horror stories, so we could be here for a while, but we have to leave in 2 minutes, so I'll do it real fast. Yeah, no, I have a few. So one of my big horror stories I think I already sort of told you about was the skin just didn't fit and it was a big waste of materials, but because it was cheap and inexpensive, you know, it wasn't too bad. Probably my worst one that I have, there's a game that I really love, Guild Wars 2, that's what my giant robot golem is from, and I've made quite a few costumes from that game, and the game company, which is located in Seattle, fairly near where I live, was like, hey, oh, you're working on this new costume, we would love to have you come and wear the costume and come to our studio and come meet the developers and stuff. And this was like dream come true. Like I was like, yes, this is so exciting. I've been playing your game for 10 years. And I wasn't really finished with the costume. Like I was like, but it's okay, we're gonna do it, we're gonna go. Because this was when I was at university and I was, you know, I had to go back for school really soon, so I was on a tight deadline. So I said, yes, no, I would love to come, I would love to go and visit your office in my new costume that I'm working on. And as you do, I really rushed that, and I didn't have enough time to put the whole costume on before I went and brought it there, which is, you know, please do that. That's very important. And so I brought this costume to the office. I live a couple hours away, so I was like, I was going to put it on, you know, in their bathroom, essentially. I was like, can I just, you know, change? So I brought the whole thing there, and I had never tried the strapping on. I had never tried the armor on. Like, I had not tried this full costume on because I was working so hard to finish it. And I got there, and I was in the game company that I adore. I was in their bathroom for about 3 hours because pieces were just sort of falling off. And I had like full, like welded together Warbler pauldrons that fell off and like split in half on the floor. And like I brought duct tape, I brought super glue, because you know, this is not my first rodeo. Like I know something's gonna, so I had it with me in the bathroom. I was like repairing these pieces and I was like doing this whole thing. And like the developer that invited me came in like 2 or 3 times. She's like, can I help you with anything? Like, are you okay? And I was like, we're getting there. Anyway, I finally managed, it was a bit embarrassing, it took so long, but I finally managed to get out. It held, I walked around the whole office, I met all the devs, it held, I took the whole thing off, I went home. Nobody really witnessed my shame. And I talked to them later, you know, at another event, and they were like, oh yeah, no, we had no idea, we thought like traffic was bad or something, you know, it took you a while. And yeah, so that worked out. But it was just, you know, it's, you know, that moment when you're panicking so much that you're just calm and you're dead and you just can't feel it. Yeah, that was me. I was like, I don't have the energy to like cry or something, you know. It was a stressful time. So I think the lesson learned, try your stuff on, reality checks, make sure, you know, if you're not gonna have time to finish something for an event or whatever, it will come around again. There's always another convention, there's always some other event, and it's just a lot more fun than traumatizing yourself with your whole costume falling apart, so.
Pieces have been falling out because
Yeah.
working on it anymore, so.
Or if you change your weight or anything like that. Yeah, it's an important thing. So. Yeah. So we're okay. All right, okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking questions. Really appreciate it. And yeah, as I said, offer absolutely stands. If you have any questions, if you're working on something in particular, my inbox is always open. So thank you. Hello.